Welcome everyone. This is the first Center for Meaningful Human Control Agora seminar. So this is a new series that we're starting. We are really building upon the tradition that we had that we developed through the AiTech initiative on meaningful human control. We can see, of course, you can see there's many presentations happened throughout the past 3-4 years, on the 5 years. Time goes by, time flies, and so today it's also a new episode, a new series on we're putting on air. So thanks Atay very much for accepting our invitation to kick off the new Agora seminar series. There's very interesting things for us. So welcome everyone also on behalf of the team behind the Center for Meaningful Human Control. So there's a lot of people involved and we're working on this. And so you can have all the information on our website, but just a quick idea. So we kick off the center last year after the summer. And we are looking into these main activities. We're doing some fundamental research on what is meaningful human control, how to do this. We wanted to also look from a transdisciplinary perspective, how to implement meaningful human control over technology in practice, but also become an international lighthouse in this. So how to talk about it, how to get common terminology across disciplines, across different fields. So that's some of the ambitions we have here. And one of the mechanisms that we envision for this to happen are indeed this Agora seminar series. So without much more from my side here, I would say thank everyone for joining. And Atay, the floor is yours. But can you also introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, so thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation. I hope you can all hear me okay and see me all right. Soon I'll share my screen and put on the PowerPoint. I want to say that I'm in the unfortunate situation where I'm going to be presenting work that has been done by a lot of the people here. And while that's unpleasant enough, if I'm going to criticize it lightly, it's even worse that I have to say the names of these people out loud, who I've only read their names ever. So if I butcher any of the names, I apologize in advance. And then please correct me during the Q&A or the discussion phase, and I'm looking forward to learning from that. Maybe one last comment. I've been participating in the UN's GGE session that's been happening this week on autonomous weapon systems, and I thought it was quite ironic over there. They're using a lot this notion of meaningful human control, but it's highly disputed, and every country is sort of pushing a different narrative. So I'm hoping that this will be a huge breath of fresh air to be in a forum that sort of agrees on what this idea is, and we can actually just focus on thinking, how do we operationalize these ideas and how to bring it about. So I'm trying to switch sort of frame of mind now in my head quickly. Okay, final comments while I start sharing my screen is that I'm going to try and give a short talk relatively. So what do I mean by short? Around 20-25 minutes at most, hopefully. And because I want to keep enough time for the discussion, which is more important for me, and the opportunity to get to know the people here. So this is part of a research project that's beginning, and I'll be touching on that throughout the presentation also. And this is the first time I'm presenting this material, so it might be rough on the edges still, and we'll see what you make of that. Okay, so without further ado, I will jump straight in. My talk today is on the idea of the problem of reasons underdetermination in meaningful human control. And what am I going to try to do today? I'm going to go through 4 different issues. The first, I'm going to be presupposing that everyone knows what meaningful human control is. So I'm going to skip more or less the detailed analysis of that and dive straight into what does it mean to operationalize MHC with the concept of reasons. And I'm going to try and highlight why reasons play an important role in this framework. After that, I'll move to this idea of reasons under determination. I'll describe the phenomena. I'll argue that it's widespread and that it's a fundamental issue that needs to be addressed in rational decision-making and rational decision theory. And then, of course, I'll do 1 + 2 and show why is this a problem for meaningful human control, or specifically for tracking and tracing. And then I'll finish by touching on sort of future research and how I intend to build on this research moving forward. Okay, so let's dive straight in. I said I'm not going to touch about the basics of MHC. Nevertheless, I'll give just a tiny overview for those who are less familiar. As a framework, this perceives the analysis of technology from a social technical perspective. So we're trying to understand what does it mean to have meaningful human control over a system that includes algorithms, human actors, organizations, and so on and so forth. So it's not simply a question about the technology itself. And it has two primary conditions or conditions that need to be met, known as tracking and tracing. We're going to go over each one of them. As we go over them, I'm going to emphasize this idea of why I take reasons to play a central role in both these conditions. Okay, so starting with tracking, I'm quoting here from Filippo and Jeroen's work. A decision-making system should demonstrably and verifiably be responsive to the human moral reasons relevant in the circumstances. That is, decision-making systems should track relevant human moral reasons. Okay, so with tracking, the link to reasons is quite self-evident. I don't think I need to make a huge effort in order to convince you all that the idea of reasons play an important role here. It's known as sort of identifying the reasons responsiveness of the system. But nevertheless, I want to go over three sort of methods or techniques that have been proposed to operationalize tracking and how they sort of appeal to this idea of reasons. So in order to do that, I'm going to look at one theory, which I've dubbed as the kinds of reasons approach, a second one, which is the moral operational design domain, and the third one, which is the proximity scale of reasons. And so let's look at them quickly. I've brought here an illustration. So you see in the car sitting there is Jealous Bob, and Jealous Bob always sees his neighbor standing there pruning his garden. Jealous Bob doesn't like that at all. And Jealous Bob wants to tell his autonomous vehicle that he's sitting in to back up and drive into the garden of his neighbor. Well, you know, so this is an image that was created by ChatGPT, and I prompted Claude to create the same image, and I got something a bit different. Make of it what you want, but this is the same image, the same prompt created these two images. And let's see how we sort of approach this question of what the autonomous vehicle should do with Jealous Bob. So if we're taking the kinds of reasons theory, what we're saying is that in order to understand which reasons the autonomous vehicle should be tracking, we want to separate the reasons into different types or different kinds that come across. And in a discussion there by Herman Brunkop, so we were talking about, he focuses there on two specific types of reasons, which I'm going to mention now quickly. One is motivational reasons. So the idea is the reasons for which we ultimately acted, what motivated us to act and what we acted for. And on the other hand, the normative reasons, those reasons that essentially play a role in justifying the action or that they count towards a certain course of action. And so if we want the autonomous vehicle to track relevant reasons in this case, a strategy to approach this would be to separate all the reasons that need to be considered into these different kinds of reasons: motivational, normative, agent relative, agent neutral. Okay, that'll be one approach to sort of to try and start understanding how tracking appeals to reasons in order to identify what the autonomous vehicle should do. Skipping now to the MODD method or approach, the same scenario, we would say, well, we have this image here where on the one side we have what the vehicle or the autonomous system can do, on the other side what it cannot do. And within the can do, we have sort of a subset, which is what it should do or ought to do in this case. And outside of it, what it should not do. And the idea, again, that with the MODD, by creating these framework or by creating these limits to the action of the system could be able to identify the reasons that are relevant in this case by focusing on what it ought to do within that can typology. Okay, so that's the second sort of method of appealing to reasons in order to understanding how to act in that scenario. And finally, the third method, the proximity scale of reasons, takes this idea that we take reasons and we understand a wide scope of concepts from values, norms, plans, intentions, and explain them all in terms of reasons for doing a certain action. And we try to create a scale which measures how important a specific reason is for the action currently by using these distal and proximal measurements. And on top of that, we can add more layers of complexity for understanding sort of not just how distant the reasons are, but how important they are in this case. So this is a third method for operationalizing MHC. And once again, we see an immediate appeal to reasons. So I think the argument here has been clear, and even if you're not very familiar with these three methods, the takeaway message here is quite simple, that in order to achieve tracking, we have a lot of different methodologies that try to appeal to this idea of reasons in order to achieve three basic things. The first is to identify whose reasons the system needs to track, which of their reasons are relevant in a given situation, and how important are those reasons. If the system can do these three things by using all these different methods that sort of bring the steps closer towards it, then we've succeeded in tracking appropriately, and the system will be reason responsive. Okay, so that's my take on tracking and sort of the role of reasons there. And I'm going to shift to the tracing condition to make the same argument. And here it's a bit more tricky, I think, because it's not as clear-cut what reasons have to do with tracing. So let's look quickly at the definition. This criterion prescribes the presence of at least one, or ideally more persons in the system, design history, or use context, who can, one, appreciate the capability of the system, and two, their own specific role as targets of potential moral consequences for the system's behavior. What does that mean? The way I understand tracing is that its focus is on trying to ensure that some human agent can be an agent of responsibility towards the actions of the system, or can be held accountable, right? We can talk about responsibility as a complex concept later, but in this sense, we're saying that in order for the system to trace from the actions of the system towards a human agent, we need that human agent understand the system to a certain degree and understand that this is their role and that they need to act on this role in some sense. Okay, now how does this link to reasons, you might ask? Well, the way it links is, again, I'm going to go through three sort of suggestions that bring reasons into play, and they all relate to this idea of explainability. So the first, I'm going to talk about explicability, which I'll explain in a second. The second will be this epistemic responsibility gaps, which is something that I just came across last week, and I thought it might be a good example. And finally, the reasons explanations account. So looking at all three of these, I'm going to try and argue again that in order to succeed in tracing, the methods that are being suggested appeal to reasons in order to explain the process of the system and go from like a black box or an opaque system to one that we can understand as humans. Let's look at it quickly. This is from Floridi in 2018, and they say the following. We must ensure that technology, or more accurately, the people and organizations developing it, are held accountable in the event of a negative outcome, which would require, in turn, some understanding of why this outcome arose. So there's a close link between responsibility and understanding of the system, and we want an understanding of why this outcome came about. So we want some kind of an explanation that can satisfy our question of why this happened or why the system acted as it did. And I think it becomes even more clear when we look at the epistemic responsibility gap, again, by Veluvenkamp, by Hellman, and this is in a recent paper. And he writes like this, and I was very fond of this sort of dissection of responsibility gaps, that an epistemic responsibility gap occurs exactly if an artificial agent causes harm, and because of its opaque decision-making structure, it is difficult, if not impossible, to determine who's to blame for it. So here we see a much stronger link already between the opaque decision-making structure, what went into the reasoning or the process of arriving at a conclusion, and whether we can hold someone accountable or to blame, right? So the link becomes clearer and clearer. And now finally, the reasons explanation account, which is by Baum et al. From 2022, and they bring two examples which I think sort of help clarify this even further. So we have here our friend Herbert, and Herbert is actually not a boxing referee, but he's the HR manager. And Herbert is assigned he needs to decide which of a few candidates will get the next job. And our candidates are Abigail and Bobby. Now, Abigail and Bobby are good applicants, let's say, and Herbert has been doing this for many years. He's very experienced, but nevertheless, the company has decided to implement an AI decision support system to help Herbert evaluate Abigail and Bobby. Now, this is a black box system, as most systems are that work on neural networks. And the system produces the output that Abigail should be rejected. Okay, she's not a good candidate. Now, unbeknownst to Herbert, the reason that the system rejected Abigail was because she was a woman. This was the reason that the system learned, and we saw cases of these kind of gender biases propping up in these decision support systems over the last few years. Now, the question is, if Herbert wouldn't know that this is the reason why Abigail was rejected, could he be deemed responsible for following the recommendation of the system? And I think Baum, now they make this argument, this is quite convincing, and I agree with that. Without a proper understanding of the system, it seems strange to say that Herbert is to blame for rejecting Abigail on the basis of her gender. Now let's take a second scenario involving similar issues. Now Herbert decides to evaluate on his own, and as he does his evaluation, he decides that Bobby is not fit for the job, but nevertheless, the system still recommends to him that Abigail should not be accepted for the job. And the question is, when it comes to a conflict between the human decision maker and the recommendation system, how are we supposed to judge who is wrong in this case? How is Herbert supposed to determine whether he has made a mistake in his evaluation or whether the system made some kind of mistake in its evaluation? And the answer to this, suggested in the paper, is that just like human experts would provide reasons for their recommendations, so should decision support systems. So here we see clearly the link has been made between responsibility, explainability, and providing that explanation in the form of reasons. Okay, so hopefully that was clear and that was part one. The takeaway message is quite simple. Tracking and tracing both rely on this notion of reasons, and now this is going to be a problem that I'm going to try and convince you of. And let's see, why is that a problem? So what is this notion of reason under determination? In order to understand reason under determination, we have to start with the question of how do we make decisions in general? And I'm advocating here for a theory known as comparativism, and it reads as the following: comparative facts about the evaluative merits of the option with respect to what matters is that in virtue of which a choice is rational in that situation. Okay, that's a bit of a word salad, it's a bit complicated. Let's understand that simpler. Essentially, what comparativism means is we take this traditional weighing model, right? We look at what are the pros and cons of the different options, we put them on the weighing model, and we see whatever is higher or lower means that one is greater or lesser. Or if we're doing an evaluative analysis, we would say that one option is better, worse, or equal than the other. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, you're living in the past century with weighing models, but I would contest that even the algorithmic model is essentially the same thing, right? You're using different kinds of weights. These weights are being multiplied by different kinds of variables, and ultimately we get an output which is determined by this calculation. It's a bit more complex than the weighing system, but essentially it's based on the same mathematical principles. Okay, so this is sort of what happens when we make comparison, and let's see that in practice. Now imagine that you're now outside in doing some sports, you're on the basketball court, and you're doing a pickup game, and you have to choose now your teams. On the one side, you have friend LeBron James, who wants to be on your 3-on-3 team. Seems like a good option. On the other side, you have the acclaimed author, George R.R. Martin. And you have to choose, who are you going to select for your team for the 3-on-3 match? Well, okay, Atay, what is a silly example? Obviously, you're going to take LeBron James. Fair enough. Okay, now let's say we're moving now, we finished the game, we're going out to dinner, and we decide alongside dinner, we want to have a symposium on critical thinking and literary work. Who do we want our speaker to be? Would we like it to be LeBron James or George R.R. Martin? Once again, this is quite a silly question. Of course, George R.R. Martin will be our choice for a literary evening. And what is the point of all this? Well, the idea is that, we've put those weights, we've looked at all the reasons that are involved in making this decision, and we've come to a conclusion. However, here's the problem. This is Reasons Underdetermination. And I brought here a quote from Joseph Raz, the philosopher, which he calls the basic belief. And I think this very neatly captures the idea that I'm after. Raz tells us the following. He says that most of the time, people have a variety of options such that it will accord with reason for them to choose any of them, and it would not be against reason to avoid any of them. So what does Raz mean by that? He means that very often when we have choices, they're not as simple as the LeBron James versus George R.R. Martin in a pickup game. Rather, we would have situations that are more like this, where we have to decide who is the better athlete. Was it LeBron James or Cristiano Ronaldo? And this is the type of cases that I'm trying to capture now with this notion of reasons underdetermination. These are instances in which it becomes unclear how to resolve the comparison at hand, even after we look at all the facts. And this can come in a variety of different ways. So here we see an abstract evaluation of athleticism, but it can also be a question of, for instance, where should I live? Is it better for me to live in the city or in the countryside? Well, I don't know. There are a lot of reasons for either of these options. Is it clear-cut whether one option is better, worse, or equal than the other? Uncertain. This is an important personal decision that we make throughout our lives. What about, professional decisions? Remember Abigail and Bobby? Is it better to hire, very creative Bobby versus very ambitious Abigail? It's not always certain that one of them will be the clear-cut better candidate for the position. And finally, we might have this in public discourse, not in a company, but we might have a situation like this where we have to allocate scarce resources. Imagine COVID-19 and we have ventilators and we have to choose how do we prioritize them. do we choose to go for those who are worse off, or do we choose those who would benefit the most? Well, again, there are reasons for this, there are reasons for that. Unclear exactly how we resolve this type of comparison. Now, reasons under determination essentially has something in common. And all these different examples, whether they're high stake, low stake, whether they are impersonal, they all share certain types of features. And these features, first of all, are this idea of incommensurability. What do I mean by incommensurability? I mean when we have to evaluate options without a clear unit of measurement by which we can compare them precisely to each other, right? We can't say whether Abigail or Bobby is taller than each other. That would be a precise unit of measurement, but we don't have that same type of centimeters or meters to measure how good of an applicant are they, right? So they may be incommensurable in that respect. Second, a lot of these examples are bidirectionally related. It means that they're very good in different types of reasons or for different types of underlying values. Living in the city would be fantastic for a social life and for going out to clubs. Living in the countryside would give you a better place to raise your kids, to be in nature, right? Very different types of reasons. And finally, in reasons under determination, we are perplexed. It is uncertain for us. We are unclear as to which of the options is better, worse, or equal than the other. Now, in the literature, there are a variety of explanations for why this happens. I'm not going to go into detail on any of these. I just want to sort of catalog them so that you can see. So one explanation might be that we are ignorant, right? There are certain facts that we just don't have access to them, or maybe it's impossible to have access to them, that would we have had access to those facts, we couldn't settle the issue. Another explanation is that there's something ultimately incomparable in these comparisons that we are making. There's something fundamentally beyond the capacity of rationality to determine which is better in these situations. A third is that these cases relate to indeterminacy or vagueness. There's something essentially vague in how we've queried the situation, right? The type of comparison that we're making is not clear cut. And finally, there's this idea of parity, which is that we're focusing here rather on quantitative aspects. We have qualitative aspects. And these qualitative aspects sort of do not allow us to make these precise types of comparison. And so we have a different type of relation that's going on between them. Regardless of which one we endorse, what all these features have in common is they all reject the idea that either option is better, worse, or equal. And that's the takeaway message I want us to have now. Reasons under determination create a situation in which neither option is better, worse, or equal than the other. Something else is going on. Okay. And then the question is, how do we deal with that when we are using these algorithms? What can we do about it, and whether this is a problem or not? And that's what we're going to be talking about now in the third and final section, coming back to MHC. And of course, as I said before, I'm just going to do 1 and 2. Reasons play an important role in tracking and tracing. Reasons can be underdetermined. Let's see why that's a problem. So I've mentioned sort of 3 different ideas in each category of tracking and tracing, or 3 different methods. And now I want to sort of argue that none of these methods have seriously taken into consideration the possibility that reasons might underdetermine the choice in hand. So let's look at an example. Remember, I said here that we might think that we could distinguish between motivational and normative reasons. And this is an excellent tool, of course, that brings us closer to understanding which reasons are relevant. But consider now the following scenario. So the conclusion in the paper is that tracking should focus on normative reasons responsiveness, because that's sort of where we should focus. But setting that for a second aside, consider now that the autonomous vehicle is now facing a situation in which I'm asking it to take me to a casino, right? And at the casino, I'm planning on spending all the inheritance that I'm going to give my children. I'm a degenerate gambler, and I'm going to spend all of it away. Obviously, this is a silly thing to do, and it shouldn't be done. But should the vehicle refuse to take me to the casino because I'm doing something that is against my normative reasons? I think a lot of us would say there's something strange about that. So focusing only on normative reasons in this case might not always give us a clear-cut answer as to how we want the vehicle to act. And moreover, as we mentioned before, normative reasons are those reasons precisely which will come into conflict when we have those cases of reasons under determination. So let's see if maybe the moral ODD would fare any better. So we said moral ODD helps us to limit the reasons that we're looking at, and maybe that's excellent, right? So we take not just general normative reasons, but let's take only the normative reasons that are within the moral ODD itself, with the ought to. And my contention is that, maybe this will help precluding certain situations, like for instance, we might say the vehicle should never judge the destination of the driver, regardless of whether it's normative or not, right? So we're excluding that kind of action from the activities of the vehicle. Nevertheless, I will say that within the moral ODD, if we are tracking normative reasons, among each other, we will come across similar situations of conflicts, of instances of reason underdetermination, because we don't know what to do only about the reasons within that domain of ought to. So perhaps the proximity scale can do better because it tells us, don't just look at normative reasons within moral ODD, right, within that domain of ought to, also use this value of reasons, right, give a weight to each reason to know which is relevant in a given situation. And once again, this is problematic because we mentioned the idea of incommensurability, which leads me at least to be skeptical about the possibility of providing a precise numerical value to reasons in general in all situations, right? That sort of contradicts the idea of incommensurability. But let's look at an example, right, and see whether we can still make heads or tails of this. So I brought here an image of a commander who is, unfortunately, he has to deal with a very terrible situation where his soldiers have mutinied. And he has to decide, what am I going to do right now? And as you see, he's holding in his hands his AI companion who's there to help him and help guide him in his decision, how to handle this mutiny by his soldiers. Should he execute the mutinous soldiers? Should he demote them in rank? Should he just be forgiving? What is the right thing to do? And I think that really captures a paradigmatic instance of reasons under determination, where it is unclear what is the right action that the commander is supposed to take. There are a great variety of options that are open to the commander, and that person needs to make a judgment call, needs to use his discretion, needs to understand how to deal with the situation. But no amount of calculation of weights that we provide as reasons could ever lead us to the correct decision in that case. And this leads me to the 4 points that I have here on the side. What we often struggle to do is that when we're using these algorithmic systems, we are sort of making a translation from normative to non-normative. We're taking concepts that may be underdetermined, right, inherently, like in this case of the mutiny, but we are creating proxies of a normative nature in order to, through brute force, determine that there is a course of action that is correct, which is a very big problem that we need to think about. Second, if reasons of determination is a big problem, it raises a huge question for tracking which reasons do we track. There may be too many reasons to track that contradict each other. So that creates an issue that we need to resolve somehow. The issue of consistency comes up also. If reasons of determination opens up a variety of eligible options, as Ross has it, should the system always be consistent? Maybe it's okay today to decide that I'm not punishing any of the mutineers, and tomorrow to decide that they should all be executed. It's unclear how we deal with this. And finally, this raises a lot of design questions. Should these recommendation systems, in general, give us recommendations, only provide us with questions, or maybe just flag these types of underdetermined situations for our discretion and our decision? How do we incorporate that into the design? Okay, turning now to the tracing issue. Again, I mentioned here that this is an explainability problem. And now let's imagine again this idea of, oh wait, so I'm sorry, I didn't change here this screen, so just ignore that on the right side. I wanted to ask different questions there, but we can just skip that one. The point I wanted to say is that if we look at the answer, when we said that we need to create an explanation, right? So here's the answer that Baumedel offer us. They say that a reasons explanation needs to state explicitly what pieces of information served as reasons for or against a certain recommendation and include the strengths of these reasons. And now here are the points that I wanted to mention on tracing. So the first of all, we're seeing that Baumedel think that we can provide the strengths of reasons, which again contradicts this idea of incommensurability. The strengths of reasons might not determine which course of action is the correct one. Another very issue is the idea of reasons and determination. When we're trying to provide an explanation for why a system acted as it did, there might be multiple eligible explanations that the system could provide us. And by giving a certain reason or pointing to a certain reason, it might not actually help us with our explanation because it could have just the same given us an alternative reason for which it acted, right? Because they're all multiply eligible. Again, valid alternative explanations exist. So the very notion of reasons of determination questions how the explanation is supposed to be presented to us. And finally, again, there's this issue of consistency and automation bias. If we are facing an instance of reasons of determination where we as decision makers are perplexed, we might have this tendency to just accept whatever recommendation the system is giving us because we are unsure what to do. So regardless of what it recommended, we'll just go with it. And that's a huge danger that we need to be concerned with. Okay, hopefully the argument was okay that I presented and it was clear what the problem is and why I see it's a problem. And I want to end by touching a bit on future research and what I plan on doing. So I'm now starting a 2-year research project to sort of explore these ideas. And the first 2 things that I'm looking to do is to validate this argument and to seek solutions to it. So by validation, what I'm looking to do is to conduct case studies. And right now I'm looking at 3 case studies that will be in collaboration with the team in Delft that I'm going to be working with Roel's team at the Social Technical AI Lab and with other partners outside of Delft. The first thing we're going to be looking at is large language models tools, specifically in the context of, in the setting of hospitals. We're looking at how does the design go into that, and whether MHC can be applied to these tools that are based on LLMs, and whether this raises these issues of reasons underdetermination. The second, I'm looking at AI decision support systems, specifically in the military context and also in the welfare system. So it's unclear on which one I'll focus yet, but I've been working in the past on the military context and I'm looking to collaborate in welfare systems, which once again, we want to understand 2 different levels. What reasons underdetermination occur at the level of the human decision maker who designs the system, and what reasons underdetermination occur within the algorithmic process of the system and how it is resolved there. And both these aspects, I think, are crucially important to understand for operationalizing, tracking, and tracing. And finally, I'm working on this issue of digital duplicates and how to design these new technologies when we are trying to enable them to make these decisions for us. How does this idea of reasons underdetermination impact our design of these types of systems? So those are sort of the 3 case studies that I'm looking at in order to validate and to identify whether and to what extent this idea of reasons underdetermination is prominent and how MHC can be applied to these 3 design contexts. And to seek solutions, although I won't go into details here, I already mentioned 4 different existing sort of articulations to reasons underdetermination in the literature. And what I'm seeking to do is to look what design recommendations would each of these explanations create for the system. If we accept that the alternatives are incomparable, how would we then design the system in accordance? If we instead accept that it's based on vagueness, what would the implications be for that? And by testing these different solutions, I think we will come up with sort of a framework for understanding in what context a different solution is appropriate, in what type of use case we would have to appeal to one solution or the other. Okay, so hopefully that was clear. And here I ended, of course, with trying to bring an example of apples and oranges. And this is the image that was created. So close enough, but not exactly there. And I look forward to the discussion and thank you for listening.
So, thanks. Thank you very much, Atay. Fascinating talk, fascinating discussions.
And now for the first time, I can see the clock, and I think I went a bit over the 20 minutes that I wanted, so I apologize for that very much. Yeah, so happy to talk about anything you guys think interesting yeah, and hear your thoughts. Maybe just one last comment before we open it up. The reason why I was so excited to come to this forum is not only because the people here are the obvious experts in this field, but because I'm really looking for partnerships. I'm looking to collaborate and to work with other people on this area, you know, to mutually benefit from it. And I think although I was a bit critical in my comments, I see a lot of value in all those theories that I sort of presented, and I think they can be strengthened by taking in these ideas from axiology, from normative ethics. So hopefully the benefit can be seen there. Okay, thank you, and I'll shut up.
Yeah, completely agree with that point. That they can create some good synergy among all the different approaches and theories. So thanks a lot for bringing the points here. Let's. So I'll keep the recording going for now. If you, as Arkady mentioned also in the comment section, so if you would rather not turn on your camera microphone, but you want to ask a question, just post in the chat and we will ask it on your behalf. So who has a question? Please just raise your hand and then we're gonna go. So Filippo, please.
Hey, Atay, thank you very much for a very clear, engaging presentation as usual. And of course, very open to continue a conversation offline and finding ways to collaborate. As for the presentation, I have a quick question about the tracing and reasons. Because whereas I find the connection, as you say, tracking and reasons are clearly connected, I'm not sure the way you present the connection between tracing and reasons is complete. because it tends to focus on the idea that the system is in use, and then you look at explainability, explicability, and others. The way I see the tracing is also that there is a meta level where if the human person thinks that the system is not enough in tracking the good reasons, making the right call, etc., may decide not to use the system. And that would be still a form of tracing at the meta level. You realize as a commander or whatever operator, designer, that the system is not good enough because incommensurability, whatever. And so you say that's a good reason at the meta level not to use the system in the first place, to keep the human accountable, responsible for an explanation, to engage in the democratic deliberation about the different reasons rather than having it to. So I was curious to hear what you think about that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. I completely agree, of course. I think that before the system comes up, the main questions will be what types of choices the designers need to make. And of course, one of those choices might be, this is too dangerous of a system. It's something that should not be used, right? I think that when we look at the history of the work, especially at Delft, that has been done on value conflicts in design, right? Going back to value sensitive design and before that value in design and all these different theories, I think there's a line that connects all of them. And they try to ask sort of, how do we take these abstract values and find a way to put them into the system that we are creating in a sense. And I think the same problem arises all throughout these years. We're going to have value conflicts. We're going to have to determine how to resolve these conflicts in some kind of way. And then we're going to have to decide whether the system should be used or not in that sense. And I think that reasons underdetermination, or hard choices, that is often called in the literature as well, apply at the exact same sense at the meta level, just to the human decision makers. So for instance, when we're trying to understand at the design level, how to put together the different, which values we're going to be focusing on, for instance, I think we'll have the same sort of struggle. It's not going to be a clear-cut answer. It might be that this system has benefits this way, has negative outputs that way. And so I think this works on both levels, within the operation of the algorithm itself, or within the system's function itself, and at the design stage. And I wrote a paper a few years back where I tried to make sort of this argument about the value-sensitive design. And there, again, we looked at all these different ways of eliciting stakeholder values, and I tried to make sort of the same arguments there as well. Also, when we're thinking just at the abstract level, should we be designing the system? Which stakeholders should be promoted? We're going to come across these exact same problems because this is emblematic for human decision-making, first and foremost. So I agree with you that tracing can be discussed there. And the focus there will be, what do the human actors do in that situation? And the same question will come up.
Thanks. Julio, I also have a question.
Yeah, mic on. Atay, thank you so much. I don't think I know a lot of people with your type of clarity of mind and, presentation skills. This is very, very, very clear. So thanks so much. I was wondering, this was my question right now. I was thinking about, what is meaningful human control about? It starts from, the very vague idea at the beginning where we think, okay, we have to avoid this highly undesirable, in the military, for instance, this highly undesirable situations where very, nasty outcomes, or the behavior of the system is highly undesirable, and also there's no way to find the controller, yada, yada. And that's where it starts. Okay, and then my question at this point was this problem of incommensurability, which I recognize. I buy into it quite completely, unless there's things that I'm not thinking. You convince me that this is a problem. But what I'm thinking right now is, okay, well, how much does this particular problem of incommensurability compromise performance and make the behavior of the system highly undesirable? It seems to me that one could argue, but you correct me, please, that there's a lot of cases where you can't know what the correct, this is another thing that you use, right? Use the expression, a correct decision. Maybe there's no correct decision. I'm not sure what it is, right? But I feel there's a class of choices or of behaviors that would be potentially good candidates or desirable candidates, and a bunch of other behaviors that aren't. And I feel like in the case that is relevant for the behavior of the system, most times these reasons would be commensurable, actually. It would be easier and they wouldn't be the same situation. Like you make the example of punching versus executing the commander, right? I don't know if that example, I buy into that example. They seem to me that there's a very big difference. They're not, I don't know if that's more like an intuition bump. That's what it looks like to me. Is that a good example of a sort of situation where reasons are underdeterminate? If so, if so, then would it mean that both behaviors of the system are kind of comparably desirable or undesirable? Because they're not, in my opinion. There's big differences, right? So this is what I'm thinking. How much, to sum it up, would underdetermination compromise the actual performance of a system being governed by a certain reason responsive algorithm? Would that be enough to create situations where, like, that's what we wanted to avoid, or just create situations where, like, yeah, okay, maybe the other thing would have been a little bit better, but okay, kind of. You know what I mean? I'm sure you do. I'm shutting up now. Thanks.
No, yes, I think you're asking the practical question. Maybe in theory you're raising an interesting point, but in practice maybe we can do good enough, right? So I think to push your intuition a bit further, let's take high stakes cases, right? I think in high stakes cases it'll become much clearer why we sort of have a problem here. Here's an issue that I've been sort of thinking about: organ donations. Okay, and if you have two applicants who need a liver, and you need to choose between them as a doctor, right? It may be, let's stack the deck in a certain way and say this is an instance of Reasons Underdetermination, right? There's no clear-cut reason to give it to A. There's no clear-cut reason to give it to B. What are you supposed to do in that case? And whether you decide A or B is life or death, essentially, right? So there's huge stakes here in this situation. I mean, and then you have to come to, so let's say you decided A, okay? Let's say you made a choice A. Or let's say, there was nothing better to do. I just randomly chose one of them, okay? Because I couldn't make my choice up. And again, you chose A. If B comes to you and asks you, what's going on here? Why didn't you choose B? B is always the better choice. Why didn't you choose me? I deserve to live. And the question is, of course, how do we justify those choices if we are in a situation of Reasons of determination? So we can point to a certain reason and say, look, A was very sick. And B will say, well, I have children. Or A will say, and yada, yada, yada. You get the point. The point inherently of instances of Reasons of determination is that you're facing an instance of a moral dilemma, to use a different phraseology, right? I don't really buy into that because it means something else in axiology, but we can push that. We're sort of, whatever choice you make cannot be fully justified on the basis of the reasons you have. And this is sort of the dilemma that we are put into. And it comes across, yeah, please, Julia.
Oh, no, if you're done, huh?
Go on. It's a good time to interrupt.
No, yes. So I still believe that in that situation of there not being important reasons to go for A over B, we might not be morally we might not have the moral duty to justify why A rather than B. It's what we do with the transplant lists. Where they start, it's time, or maybe you go A, and then from A to Z. There's no, societally speaking, when you look at the societal control of technology, both people deserve to leave. Only one can leave. If there's no reason to go for one or another, you go for one for anything that you can think of, including tipping a point of something little scale, and you don't have. But do you maybe have the duty to justify with reasons a choice that cannot be justified with reasons? The reason is there was no reason to go for A or B, and you've got unlucky. Happens every day. I don't know if you're morally compelled to make that explanation. That's what I'm saying. But I genuinely don't know. So I'm really asking.
No, fair enough. And I think that sort of when we look at the literature from Derek Parfit to Ronald de Sosa to Joseph Ross to Ruth Chang, all the people who sort of devoted themselves to trying to understand these notions, I think what they're pulling at often is that this is a widespread phenomenon. We come across it often, and there's sort of competing ways for us to try and understand what it is that we're supposed to do in these situations. And that's why, so I'm a student of Ruth Chang, and sort of I'm a parity advocate. But in my research project, I tried to stay agnostic on this. And there's sort of multiple accepted interpretations in the literature. And I think each of them sort of promote a different way of approaching these choices. And so I'm not trying to in advance commit myself to either one of them, and trying to sort of see how would these different approaches impact the way we make choices. But regardless of which approach we advocate for, a choice will have to be made. So we're going to make certain decisions, and we'd better be sort of very clear as to why we are choosing those approaches. Yeah, if they exist out there and if they're alternatives. And sort of to answer your question any further than that, we would have to start going into the details of what do these different approaches sort of advocate for, and why there's a distinction between, you know, precisification through indeterminacy and commitments through. I mean, I'm happy to. I go into that a bit in my paper and in my but obviously here I didn't go into those details. But you're raising a valid point, and there are multiple ways to address this. There's a great paper by John Danaher, who wrote about this question of delegating choices. I like his paper because he sort of raises this idea of, you know, maybe there are external reasons why we should give up the right to decide, because of pressure, because of moral anguish, because of harm or whatever. And sort of there's a discussion over this as to sort of where do we land on that, and what is lost when we delegate. And I think we need to sort of be very aware that something is lost when we give these up. And we don't necessarily need to, and this relates to agency, right? And to our ability to shape our identity. So just a final point on this. Take the medical example that I discussed in my presentation. Should we prioritize those who are worse off, or should we prioritize those who would benefit most? And I would say there are a lot of reasons for each you know, health policy way to go. And I doubt that you can prove that one creates more quality than the other, or however you want to do this, okay? I think that nevertheless, there's a huge impact to which policy we decide in terms of what kind of society we are, what type of values do we cherish, what is our own personal identity in this respect. And sort of Reasons Underdetermination, in my approach, in my opinion, give us this opportunity to actively shape that kind of identity. It gives us as a society the ability to determine. We know that maybe objectively speaking, there's no perfect answer here. We as a society go for this option. And so there's something powerful about that, and that's part of the work that I'm doing.
In terms of sort of active responsibility.
Yes, correct.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to ask.
Yeah, thanks, Atay. So I thought it was very cool presentation, really nice. So I basically had the same worry or question that Julio had. So I thought maybe you can rephrase it a little bit. So I wonder, it seems to matter what kind of incommensurability you are committed to. So if there is some kind of radical incommensurability where no reasons can be compared to each other, and that seems to be a real problem. But I don't think even Ruth Chang believes that. So if that's the case, then it seems that there is indeed some kind of ranking that can be made, and that there are some options, that there might be multiple options that are permissible. So I thought maybe what would perhaps for me would be helpful if you could explain what is the difference between in this case, the autonomous situation and the regular case. So suppose there's just a human making this decision, and there is this hard choice, as Ruth Chang would call it. So wouldn't that be the same kind of problem, or do you think that there is a relevant difference?
So is there a difference between whether a human makes a decision or an autonomous system?
Yeah, so if a human makes a decision, so the incommensurability is also a worry. And if you opt for one option and the other one is not better but incommensurable, then the person might still come to you and complain and ask you to justify your decision. So that seems to be the same kind of problem, but maybe it isn't.
Yeah, so I think that it is the same kind of problem. I agree with that intuition. I think we can take insights from the human discussion to the algorithmic discussion and how we do it. I think there are substantive differences, though. One is this issue of scale, right? When we make sort of a determination about, let's say, a hiring system, and it might spread across society, right, to a level where that one sort of design choice that we made has huge, huge implications for a lot of people's lives. So that's a factor that we need to consider. So this relates to this notion of algorithmic monotonicity, right? So when we are faced with these types of situations, we might come to the point where we are embedding these one types of decisions within all of these artificial systems, rather than having the agency to reconsider every single time coming over it. So by creating these algorithmic rules. The second problem is that, and here I'm making a metaphysical claim, that my metaphysical claim is that humans do not think algorithmically, whereas these systems are mathematical creations in essence, right? And I think there is a difference between the way we approach decision-making as humans and how we design systems to resolve cases, to calculate courses of action, right? And I think that that type of difference can be significant to the question of whether these systems can resolve such cases, right? So Ruth Cheng, for instance, is working on that. It's a bit of a radical claim that you need to change the very mathematics within these systems to go from a weighing model to an interval model, to use different formulations of mathematics in there. So that's one different aspect that come up. But in essence, I think they're similar situations. And I think that the one advantage that we have is that, whereas oftentimes we can't sort of reflectively control our own choices because we're creatures of desires and creatures. Yeah, when we're actively thinking about how to design a system, we're sort of put into this uncomfortable or privileged situation where we can make those choices actively. I was in a discussion with a colleague recently about autonomous vehicles and trolley situations. And he was like saying, oh, there's way too much import. Everyone's talking about trolley. Stop this nonsense. Just design the system to be safe. This is a waste of time. And I was trying, fair enough, yeah. And I was trying to make to him the point that, yes, maybe you're practically right, yeah. The system will be designed so it doesn't have to kill Granny or the dog, right? Fair enough. But the point is different. From an ethical standpoint, when we're designing these systems, and I think this is a huge privilege if we embrace it, we can make these types of choices in advance, whereas in real time, you can't make those choices often, right? So again, to touch on the differences, but yeah, it's an emerging field and I'm still thinking about it, so yeah.
Great, thanks.
Thanks. Just checking, I think Nadine, you had your hand raised, just checking if you have a question or not. If not, again.
Yeah, basically, I have a question, but I have also to leave in about 5 minutes. So I will drop you a message, Atay, but thank you very much for your talk.
Good to see you, Nadine. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks. Arkady.
Yeah, thanks for the fascinating. I really enjoy the discussion that is happening so far, especially as somebody who studied human decision making for more than I think 6 years. It's fascinating how we have been imposing this strong requirements on automated decision making systems that they should really track more reasons and then should be able to really make this kind of choices. But we are really willing to let it go when it comes to humans. Well, you're making the decision by intuition, using your gut feeling. Yeah, go ahead. You have agency. Very good. But I think I think there's a good reason to do that. But my question actually relates to the argument that you made, Atay, regarding moral operational design domain, right? And I'm not unbiased here, so I'll put this question as a devil's advocate, right? And to be a bit less biased, I guess. But then, so I guess if I understand the problem of reason underdetermination, the way you present it is, well, we are asking the system to track reasons and arbitrate between them in cases where reasons are really not determined. So it's just putting it in my own simplified phrasing, right? However, if I look back at the notion of moral operational design domain, as in what kind of reasons are important, blah, blah, blah. But also, I think one part of that notion is that the system should understand in a way understand is not the right word, but the system should recognize what kind of decisions it is supposed to make and what kind of decisions it is not supposed to make. Well, wouldn't it be trivial to say, well, if the reasons are really not determined, then the system just should not make these kind of decisions?
Yes, that would be the obvious answer, to say, don't make that decision. And that's in fact what I wrote once a paper about that. It's called, when the system comes across a hard choice or a reason of determination, it should raise a flag and ask for human feedback, which is a good way to go. The problem is, if we push this far and if we accept that this is a widespread phenomena, we might be basically losing the very essence of why we are trying to create these systems for efficiency, for gains, right? And so it's not necessarily the best tactic to approach it. It might be the safest tactic. And again, if we think about stakes, right? There may be low stakes choices. Should I have coffee or tea today? Should I eat that chocolate cake or that apple strudel, right? Then maybe I say, you know what? I get it that it's underdetermined. I get it that I'm losing agency. That's fine. You know, let the system do. So I'm not a radical in saying that no cases of reasons underdetermination should ever be settled by a system. I think, though, that we should acknowledge that this poses a fundamental problem that we need to address, and we can address it. Maybe through identifying stakes, maybe through procedures in which we create feedback loops with humans. Maybe we can also, and I'm doing this with a colleague of mine, we're experimenting whether large language models can identify these types of hard choices by using either reinforcement learning or a robust procedure in which it uses what's called the small improvement argument. So this is sort of the argument that's used theoretically to identify these types of cases. And we're testing whether these systems can, even if theoretically they can't sort of identify these because they don't have the human perspective, perhaps they can simulate it to a satisfactory degree where they can identify it. And I'm open to that maybe being a possibility. So we're playing around with that and testing it. So all those concerns sort of go into why just say clear cut, don't do anything.
Great, thanks a lot. I'm looking forward to more discussions.
Yeah, so thanks for all them. Yeah, nice engaging discussion here. That's really like the goal of the Agora seminar series. Thank you all for joining. So thanks Atay for the great presentation and really captivating, motivating discussions here. Atay, there's one more question for you still on the chat. If you have the time to go through those, also Lucas also left his contact information there. I will not have one, but I'll hold it until we talk again soon, maybe here in Delft. So thanks, and looking forward to the next steps. And everyone have a great day.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Atay.
Thanks so much, everyone.
It was fun.